Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something? I think we all crave it, human connection, but we're not just talking surface level stuff here.
No, no.
We're going deep.
We are going deep.
With insights from psychiatrist Dr. Paul Conti, who's been talking about relationships and the self on Huberman Lab.
Such good stuff.
Oh my gosh, buckle up. This one's packed with aha moments.
So many good takeaways. I think this one's going to really make people rethink some things.
Yes, for sure. I had to pause and rethink a few things while I was prepping for this one.
Oh,
Okay,
look you.
Dr. Conti starts with this idea of the healthy person as the bedrock of any healthy relationship.
Right.
Like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah, but it's more like you can't pour from a cracked and leaky cup either.
Yeah.
He uses this really great analogy of a geyser. Imagine agency and gratitude as the water springing forth. But what powers that geyser?
Okay.
Two pillars. The structure of yourself and the function of yourself.
So it's not just about like feeling good.
Right.
It's about having the internal plumbing to support those positive feelings.
Yeah, exactly. There are 10 components within those pillars.
Right.
Things like self-regulation, knowing your values, having meaningful pursuits. It's not about being perfect at all of them, but it's about recognizing that these are the areas that, if worked on, fuel your ability to act with agency and to feel genuine gratitude.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
If you're constantly battling inner chaos, it's hard to show up as your best self
Yes.
in any relationship.
In any relationship.
You know what else Dr. Conti busted for me?
Yeah.
This month of compatibility being all about shared interests.
Oh, yeah.
Like you hear that all the time, but he's like, no, no, no.
Think about it. You know those couples that seem perfect on paper?
Yeah.
Same hobbies, same backgrounds. They even have the same astrological sign.
Right.
But then their relationship just fizzles.
Yeah.
Dr. Conti says the real foundation is something he calls the generative drive.
Okay, break that down for me. What is a generative drive and why is it so crucial?
Okay, so it's this inherent desire to create, to grow, to make things better.
Yeah.
And not just for yourself, but for the world around you. Two people could have totally different musical tastes.
Right.
But if they both have that burning drive to learn, to evolve, to contribute, that's where the real connection sparks.
So it's less about liking all the same things and more about liking the act of growing and exploring together.
Exactly. Think about it this way. One person thrives on stability and routine, while the other one craves constant change. That misalignment in generative drive will eventually lead to friction.
For sure.
Recognizing that early can save a lot of heartache.
Ooh, it's already making me rethink some friendships.
Uh-oh.
But let's get a bit more specific. Dr. Conti mentions other drives too, right?
Yeah.
Like aggressive drive and pleasure drive.
Uh-huh.
How do those fit into this whole picture?
Okay, so think of it like an internal team.
Okay.
Everyone has all of these drives. They represent our potential.
Yeah.
But in a healthy individual, the generative drive is the leader, the captain guiding the team towards constructive outcomes.
I like that analogy. Okay, so how does this actually play out in a real relationship? Like, give me an example.
Okay, let's say there's a couple with mismatched libidos. One person's pleasure drive is through the roof.
Okay.
The other's not so much.
Yeah.
Without a strong generative drive leading the way, this just turns into tension, resentment, guilt trips.
Yeah, I can see that going south fast.
Yeah, exactly. But with a strong generative drive, that same couple can approach that situation completely differently.
Okay.
They communicate, they compromise, they find ways to meet each other's needs without sacrificing their own. It's not about settling, it's about creating something better through mutual effort.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift in perspective. It's not about finding someone who perfectly matches your every desire.
Right.
It's about finding someone who shares that drive to make things work, to grow together.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really interesting aspect of relationships. Trauma bonds.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, where people seem drawn to the same unhealthy patterns over and over again.
It's almost like they're choosing those bad relationships on purpose.
Right. It's like, why do you keep doing this? But it's not a conscious choice.
Okay.
It's often the limbic system hijacked by past trauma.
Okay.
So say you always end up with emotionally unavailable partners. That might be your limbic system still stuck on a painful experience from your past, trying to fix it by recreating that familiar feeling.
So it's not about masochism. It's about the brain seeking a warped sense of resolution.
Exactly. The good news is, by recognizing this, by working on that inner map of the self we talked about, people can break free.
I love that.
And there's a flip side to trauma bonds, too.
Okay.
One with a positive spin.
Tell me more.
Okay, so imagine two people with social anxiety.
Okay.
Individually, they're terrified to go to a museum or a concert.
Yeah.
But together, they feel safe enough to try. They can share the experience, encourage each other. And that shared challenge, coupled with individual work, becomes a source of healing and growth.
That's actually really beautiful. So trauma bonds can be tricky, but not always doom and gloom. Okay, what about those more obviously unhealthy dynamics, though? Like the classic narcissist-dependent pairing.
Yeah, unfortunately, those are really common.
It's like the classic.
The narcissist thrives on exploiting vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
creating that power imbalance, and the dependent person, often already struggling with self-worth, gets further demoralized.
Mm-hmm.
Their agency is chipped away. Recognizing this is the first step toward breaking the cycle.
Yeah, it's like that saying, hurt people, but taken to a whole other level.
Yes.
But, you mentioned power dynamics earlier, and it made me think, isn't that present in all relationships?
Absolutely.
Not just the romantic ones.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Any relationship where there's an imbalance of influence, whether it's a boss, an employee, or even among friends,
Right.
can become problematic, especially in closed systems with no accountability. Like what I witnessed with the abuse on that medical team.
Right. That was a chilling example
It was.
of how quickly things can spiral when unchecked power runs rampant.
And it often boils down to envy on the abuser's part and demoralization for the abused. Which sadly brings us to this common idea of relationships being purely transactional.
Yeah, that kind of cynical view.
Yeah.
Like, it's all just a cost-benefit analysis.
Right. And while transactions do exist in every relationship, reducing it to only that misses the point entirely. Think of a family with a stay-at-home parent and a working parent. Yes, there's a financial transaction happening, but what emerges is a loving, generative unit. The family that benefits everyone involved.
So the family itself becomes this entity, this source of love and growth that transcends the individual transactions.
Precisely. It's that shared creation fueled by generative drive that defines truly healthy connection. Which brings us to boundaries, something we hear a lot about these days. But where do you even start with setting healthy boundaries? It always begins with yourself, understanding your own needs, your limits, what you're comfortable with. Let's say you have a friend who just waltzes into your house unannounced.
Okay.
First, ask yourself, does this genuinely bother me, or am I okay with it? Self-reflection comes first.
So no need to set a boundary if it's not actually an issue for you.
Exactly. But if it does bother you, then clear, compassionate communication is key.
Okay.
Hey, I love seeing you, but I'd appreciate it if you text me before you come over. Emphasize that respecting each other's boundaries actually strengthens the connection. It's not about pushing people away.
That's a good reminder. Boundaries aren't about walls. They're about creating a safe space
Yes.
for the relationship to thrive. Now, what about this whole mentalization thing? It sounds kind of complex.
It is, but also incredibly useful. Mentalization is basically the ability to understand the thoughts and feelings of both ourselves and others. It's like having an emotional GPS, but it starts by knowing your own location first.
So before I jump to conclusions about why my partner's acting distant,
Yes.
I need to check in with myself.
Yes.
Is this about me, about them, about us?
Exactly. It prevents us from projecting our own stuff onto the other person.
Yeah.
Mentalization is really powerful for empathy, but it shouldn't be an escape from self-awareness.
Okay. I'm starting to see the connections between all of these concepts.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, generative drive boundaries, mentalization.
Yes.
They all feed into each other.
They do.
It's almost like kindergarten.
You're not wrong. Think about it. Communication, listening, generosity, kindness, a focus on learning and growth. We learned the blueprint for healthy relationships back in kindergarten.
It's like we already have the map, but life's complexities sometimes make us forget how to read it.
That's a great way to put it.
This is a lot to process.
I know, right?
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface.
No, there's so much more.
What else can we expect in this deep dive?
Well, we'll be exploring how to apply all of these concepts to specific relationship challenges, how to communicate more effectively, and ultimately how to cultivate a life that's rich in meaningful connections.
I am ready to keep diving.
Right.
Listeners, stick around. This is about to get even more interesting.
It's interesting, we often get caught up in this idea that relationships should be perfectly balanced, like a seesaw, where each person gives and receives in equal measure.
Right, like the whole keeping score thing. But that just seems kind of exhausting.
It is.
And maybe even a bit cynical.
Exactly. And Dr. Conti suggests that this kind of rigid accounting can actually hinder the natural flow of generosity and care that's so essential to a thriving relationship.
Hold on. So you're saying I shouldn't be keeping track of like who did the dishes last or who paid for the last date?
Well, it's not about ignoring fairness altogether.
Right.
But remember, we're talking about relationships where both individuals have a strong generative drive.
Okay.
In those cases, there's a natural ebb and flow of giving and receiving. There will be times when one person needs more support and times when the roles reverse.
It's like a dance, not a spreadsheet.
Exactly.
You move together, you support each other through the different steps and rhythms.
Yes. And it's that willingness to show up for each other, even when it's not perfectly equal,
Right.
that builds a deep sense of trust and connection.
It's funny. That makes me think back to the whole transactional relationships thing we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Right. It's easy to fall into that transactional mindset, especially in a culture that often emphasizes individual gain and self-interest. But reducing a relationship to mere transactions misses the magic, the synergy that happens when two people fueled by generative drive create something more together.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example of how this more manifests.
Okay, imagine a couple where one person is the primary earner while the other stays home with the kids. On the surface, it might look like a simple financial transaction. One provides money, the other provides childcare and housework.
Oh yeah, been there, done that.
Right.
But it was so much more complex than just those basic roles.
Exactly. What emerges is something far richer. A loving family unit, a source of shared purpose and meaning, a foundation for both individual and collective growth.
Wow.
That's the generative power at work.
Yeah.
The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
I love that. Okay, I'm starting to get it. It's not about constantly measuring who's contributing what. It's
Right.
about recognizing that when two people with a strong generative drive come together, they create something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. And that reminds us that the generative drive isn't limited to romantic relationships. It's the foundation of any fulfilling connection, whether it's with friends, colleagues, or even our community.
So how do we tap into that?
Mm.
How do we move beyond the transactional and create those truly nourishing connections?
Remember that map of the self we talked about?
Yeah.
The 2 pillars, the 10 components?
Right.
That's our starting point. It's about building a strong foundation within ourselves before we can truly connect with others in a meaningful way.
So self-awareness is key, but it's not a one-time thing.
No, it's
Yeah.
an ongoing process.
Yeah.
We need to keep checking in with ourselves, asking those tough questions, taking stock of what we've tucked away in those metaphorical cupboards, and making adjustments as needed.
So inner work fuels outward connection.
Exactly. The more we understand ourselves, the more capacity we have for showing up authentically, offering genuine support, and building relationships on something deeper than a simple exchange of goods and services.
This is making me rethink some of my own relationships. Like maybe I haven't been showing up as my best self in some instances.
And that's the beauty of this exploration. It's an invitation to reassess, to shift perspectives, and to approach our connections with more intention and awareness.
Instead of obsessing over perfect balance or keeping score, we focus on cultivating that shared generative energy.
Precisely. And remember, it's not about perfection. It's about progress. It's about showing up with an open heart, a willingness to learn and grow alongside another person, and a shared commitment to creating something truly special.
Okay, we've covered self-awareness, generative drive, even those tricky power dynamics.
Uh-huh.
But there's another piece of the puzzle that feels really essential.
What's that?
Communication.
Ah, yes. Communication is the lifeblood of any relationship. It's how we express needs, navigate disagreements, share feelings, and build that shared understanding that's so crucial for connection.
Easier said than done, though,
Man.
right? I mean, we've all had those moments where we completely miscommunicate, even with the best intentions.
It's true. Communication is a skill that takes practice, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable. And it all starts with listening. Truly listening to what the other person is saying, both with their words and their body language.
So it's not just about getting our own point across. It's about creating space for both people to feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And that requires empathy, that ability to step into the other person's shoes and see the world from their perspective, even if it's different from our own.
Which brings us right back to mentalization.
Yes, mentalization is a powerful tool for effective communication because it helps us understand the motivations and feelings behind someone's words and actions.
So instead of immediately assuming the worst or jumping to conclusions,
Right.
we pause, we reflect, we try to grasp where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And that creates a foundation for open, honest, and compassionate communication.
Okay, listening, empathy, mentalization. Got it.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we need to set boundaries or address a conflict? How do we navigate those conversations effectively?
That's where assertiveness comes in. It's about communicating our needs and limits clearly and respectfully without resorting to aggression or passive aggression.
So it's about finding that balance between being direct and being kind.
Exactly. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's about honoring your own well-being and creating healthy dynamics in the relationship.
And when conflicts inevitably arise,
Yes.
it's about approaching them as a team, seeking to understand each other's perspectives and finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
Precisely. Conflict is a natural part of any relationship. It's how we handle conflict that determines whether it tears us apart or brings us closer together.
Okay, so communication is key.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the words we say, right? It's also about how we say them. Our tone of voice, our body language, the whole shebang.
Absolutely. Nonverbal communication speaks volumes. It can convey warmth and authenticity, or it can signal defensiveness and judgment.
So even if we're saying all the right things, if our tone or body language is sending a conflicting message that could create confusion and erode trust.
You're right. That's why it's so important to be mindful of our nonverbal cues. Making eye contact, maintaining open posture, using a tone of voice that conveys respect and care.
And it's about tuning into the other person's nonverbal cues as well, right? Noticing their body language, their facial expressions, and responding accordingly.
Yes, it's about creating a dynamic of mutual attunement where we're constantly sending and receiving messages, both verbal and nonverbal, and working together to create that shared understanding.
All this talk about nonverbal communication makes me think about physical touch. A hug, a pat on the back, even just a gentle touch on the arm can communicate so much warmth and connection.
Absolutely. Physical touch is a powerful form of nonverbal communication, especially in close relationships. It can release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, reduce stress, and foster a sense of safety and security.
But of course, respect for personal boundaries is paramount here. Not everyone is comfortable with physical touch, and it's crucial to be sensitive to those preferences.
You're absolutely right. Consent and respect are non-negotiable when it comes to physical touch. And even in close relationships, it's important to communicate our needs and preferences clearly and to be receptive to the other person's cues.
So it's about finding that balance between expressing affection and honoring boundaries.
Exactly. And recognizing that physical touch is just one element of communication. A powerful one, but not the only one. Now, there's one more aspect of communication that's often overlooked, and it might surprise you.
Ooh, lay it on me. What's the secret ingredient?
Humor.
Humor. Really? I wouldn't have thought of that.
I know, right? It might seem counterintuitive, but humor can be incredibly powerful for building connection and diffusing tension.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Laughter releases endorphins, those natural mood boosters. It can help us see things from a new perspective, let go of grudges, and reconnect on a lighter note.
So it's not about making light of serious issues or using humor to avoid difficult conversations. It's about finding those moments of shared laughter that can bring us closer and remind us of the joy in our connections.
Exactly. Humor can be a powerful antidote to stress, conflict, and negativity. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between lightheartedness and seriousness that allows us to connect more deeply and authentically.
Wow. This is making me realize just how much intention and effort goes into building and maintaining healthy, fulfilling connections. It's not something that just happens on autopilot.
You're right. Relationships are like gardens. They require constant tending, nurturing, and care, but the rewards are immeasurable.
So let's talk practicalities.
Yeah.
What are some actionable steps and takeaways that our listeners can use to start building better connections today?
Okay, here are a few ideas to get you started. First, prioritize self-awareness. Carve out some time each day to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Ask yourself, what's working well in my relationships? What could be improved? What are my needs and boundaries?
So it's about getting to know ourselves better before we can even think about connecting with others.
Exactly. Next, nurture your generative drive. What are you passionate about? What are your unique talents and skills? How can you contribute those to the world around you?
Find your spark and let it shine.
Yes.
I love it. What else?
Practice active listening. When someone is talking to you, put away your phone, make eye contact, and really focus on what they're saying. Ask clarifying questions, summarize their points, reflect back their emotions, all those things that show you're truly engaged.
So it's about shifting from a mindset of waiting to speak to a mindset of genuine curiosity and engagement.
You got it. And finally, don't underestimate the power of small gestures of kindness and appreciation. A handwritten note, a thoughtful gift, or even just a simple thank you can go a long way in strengthening connections.
It's like those little acts of care create a ripple effect of positivity and warmth.
Exactly. And remember, building better connections is an ongoing journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, challenges and triumphs, but by staying committed to personal growth, open communication, and a shared generative drive, we can create relationships that are truly nourishing, supportive, and filled with joy.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling inspired to reevaluate some of my own relationships and to put these principles into practice.
That's fantastic. And remember, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
There are resources available, books, articles, podcasts, therapists that can offer support and guidance along the way.
So where do we go from here? What other insights await us as we continue this deep dive into human connection?
We'll explore the surprising power of vulnerability, the art of forgiveness and reconciliation, and ultimately how to cultivate a life that's rich in meaningful, fulfilling connections.
Can't wait to dive deeper. Listeners, stick around. We're just getting started. Wow, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a sense of hope after those last two segments.
Yeah, me too.
Like, even though relationships take work, it's not all doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
There's real power in understanding the mechanics of connection.
Absolutely. And it's empowering, isn't it? It's not about finding that mythical, perfect person.
Right.
It's about becoming a better version of ourselves so we can show up more fully in all of our relationships.
Yes, it's like that whole putting on your own oxygen mask first thing. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you certainly can't build a strong connection if your own foundation is shaky.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual growth. It's about recognizing that compatibility isn't this static thing based on surface level similarities. It's about that shared commitment to growth, that willingness to compromise, and of course that generative drive we keep coming back to.
That desire to create, to evolve, to make things better for ourselves, for our relationships as friends, as a family unit. It's kind of contagious, isn't it?
It is. And it reminds me of this point Dr. Conti makes about how generosity plays into all of this. It's not about keeping score. It's about recognizing that a healthy relationship is a space where giving and receiving are fluid.
So instead of that rigid you owe me one mentality,
Right.
it's more about trusting that the support will be there when you need it, knowing that you're equally willing to give when the other person needs it.
Exactly. It's about creating a dynamic of mutual support where both people feel safe enough to be vulnerable, knowing they won't be judged or taken advantage of.
Speaking of vulnerability, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot in the context of relationships. What does it really mean to be vulnerable, and how does it factor into building those strong connections?
It's about letting someone see the real you. The parts you might normally keep hidden, the parts that feel a bit raw or uncertain.
And I think that's where a lot of us get tripped up, right? We're so conditioned to present this perfect, polished version of ourselves, especially in the age of social media.
It's true, but true connection can't happen without vulnerability. It's about letting your guard down, trusting the other person to handle your heart with care.
That makes sense. But isn't there a risk involved? Like, what if you open up and get hurt?
Of course there's risk. There's risk in any relationship, in any aspect of life where we truly put ourselves out there. But without vulnerability, we're only ever experiencing a shallow version of connection. We're keeping ourselves at arm's length, preventing true intimacy from developing.
I guess it's like anything worthwhile in life, right?
Exactly.
There's always some element of risk involved. But the potential rewards outweigh the fear.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important element of healthy relationships, forgiveness. Because let's face it, even in the best of connections, we're going to mess up sometimes. We're going to hurt each other intentionally or unintentionally.
Forgiveness is hard, though, especially when the hurt runs deep. How do we even begin to forgive someone or even ourselves for those inevitable missteps?
It starts with understanding, not condoning the behavior, but trying to see things from the other person's perspective. What were they going through? What might have led them to act that way?
So it's about putting ourselves in their shoes, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes. We're all works in progress, and holding on to anger and resentment only hurts us in the long run.
It's like that saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
That's a good one. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the behavior. It means choosing to release the negative emotions that are keeping us stuck. It's about creating space for healing and moving forward.
Okay, forgiveness, got it.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where the relationship is just toxic?
Yeah.
Where there's constant conflict, disrespect, or even abuse?
Yeah.
Is it always worth trying to salvage those connections?
That's a tough one, and there's no easy answer. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away, to protect your own well-being, and to create space for healthier relationships to enter your life.
I think that's a message a lot of people need to hear. It's okay to prioritize your own well-being, even if it means letting go of a relationship that's no longer serving you.
Absolutely. And sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the other person.
So after this deep dive into the complexities of human connection, what are we left with? What are some key takeaways that our listeners can carry with them as they navigate their own relationships?
I think one of the most important insights is that building better connections starts with understanding ourselves. It's about investing in personal growth, cultivating self-awareness, and nurturing those qualities that make us good partners, friends, and members of our community.
So it's not about finding the perfect person. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves so we can show up authentically and contribute to something bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. And remember, compatibility isn't just about shared interests or similar personalities. It's about a shared commitment to growth, a willingness to compromise, and that all-important generative drive.
That desire to create, to evolve, to make things better for ourselves, for our relationships, and for the world around us.
Yes, and the generative drive isn't some magical quality that some people have and others don't. It's something we can cultivate and nurture through intentional action and effort.
So what are some concrete steps our listeners can take to start cultivating that generative drive and building better connections?
Here are a few ideas to get you started. First, prioritize self-reflection. Carve out time each day to check in with yourself. Ask yourself, what am I grateful for? What are my strengths and weaknesses? What are my needs and boundaries?
So it's about creating a space for honest self-assessment and getting to know our own internal landscape.
Exactly. Second, identify areas where you feel passionate and purposeful. What are your unique talents and skills? How can you contribute those to the world around you?
Find your spark, that thing that lights you up, and share it with the world.
Precisely. Third, practice active listening. Put away distractions, make eye contact, and truly engage with what the other person is saying. Ask clarifying questions, reflect their emotions, and make them feel truly heard and understood.
So it's about shifting from waiting to speak to genuine curiosity and engagement.
You got it.
Yeah.
And finally, don't underestimate the power of small gestures of kindness and appreciation. A handwritten note, a thoughtful gift, or a simple thank you can go a long way in strengthening your connections.
It's those little acts of care that weave the fabric of strong, lasting relationships.
Absolutely. And remember, building better connections is a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps along the way, but by committing to personal growth, open communication, and a shared generative drive, you can create relationships that are truly nourishing, supportive, and filled with joy.
This has been an incredible deep dive, and I know I'm walking away with a lot to think about. What about you? What's resonating most after this exploration of human connection?
For me, it's the reminder that even in a world that often feels transactional and self-focused, we all crave genuine connection. And the key to unlocking that potential lies within each of us. It starts with cultivating the best versions of ourselves and approaching our relationships with intention, empathy, and generosity.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Remember, the journey to better connections starts with you. So what will you choose to cultivate today? We'll be back next time with another fascinating deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep growing.